This is southern Ukraine, flat grass, wind, a sky so wide it feels like the earth forgot to put walls up. Right now, in 2024, this land is a war zone. Missiles, displaced families, a country fighting to exist. But 4,500 years ago, this exact place, this exact soil, something left here that never came back. And it ended up in Norway. Here is what the science actually found. Roughly half of the DNA inside every Norwegian alive today does not trace back to the fjords or the longships or any ancestor who ever stood on Scandinavian ground. It traces back here, to nomadic horsemen on this steppe who packed up and moved northwest around 2900 BCE and never stopped moving until they hit the North Sea. Morten Allentoft is a geneticist at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. His team spent years sequencing hundreds of ancient genomes from across Europe. In January 2024, they published the largest ancient DNA study of post-glacial Western Eurasia ever assembled. And what that study found in Norway's Bronze Age burial sites was not what anyone was ready for. The steppe ancestry didn't trickle in. It didn't blend gradually. Within a few centuries, it had come to structurally dominate the Norwegian genome. This isn't just ancient history. This is in your genome right now. And the story of how it got there is not the story anyone told you. If you've ever wondered where you actually come from, not the mythology, the actual genome, subscribe now. Because what scientists found underneath the Viking story is not a footnote. It is the entire floor. But here is the question that the data forces you to ask. If half of every Norwegian's DNA came from the Ukrainian steppe, then something was already there. Something that had been there for 5,000 years. Something that made room. What happened to the people who were already there? The men who built the first shelters along those fjords, who left the earliest rock carvings on Norwegian stone. They left genetic descendants alive in the world today. Tens of millions of them. We do not know a single word of their language. Before we go further, I genuinely want to know something about you. Have you ever taken a DNA ancestry test? And if you have, did the result match what your family always believed about where you came from? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Because by the end of this video, whatever you thought you knew about that answer is going to look different. Language leaves no fossil, but bone does. In 1988, an archaeologist named Svein Indralid was excavating a shell midden, essentially an ancient rubbish heap, at a site called Kotadalen in Vestland, Norway. Among the debris, his team found a molar tooth. One tooth. It belonged to a man who had lived approximately 4,800 years ago. His genome, when it was eventually sequenced, showed almost pure Western hunter-gatherer ancestry. No steppe, no farming. Just the deep, unbroken lineage of people who had occupied those fjords for over 5,000 years. He ate salmon. He used antler for tools. His people had been there since the ice retreated. We know he existed because of that tooth. We know he was replaced because of a ratio. Torsten Günther at Uppsala University in Sweden spent years reconstructing the genetic history of pre-Bronze Age Scandinavia. What his team found in the ancient burial record is this. Before the Bronze Age transition, the dominant male genetic lineage in Scandinavia, Y chromosome haplogroup Y, the paternal fingerprint of the original hunter-gatherers, was everywhere. After the transition, it was almost nowhere. Not gradually, not slowly, rapidly. But here's where it gets strange, because the men disappeared. The women didn't. When scientists separate the ancient DNA into its male and female components, Y chromosome and mitochondrial, the picture splits. The male line collapses with the incoming wave. The female line shows far greater continuity. The women of the old population survived. They became the mothers of a new one. But the men who had stood beside them, the men who had called those fjords home for 50 centuries, their genetic line ends in the Bronze Age strata like a sentence cut off mid-word. In 2016, researchers at the University of Oslo extracted DNA from Neolithic burial sites along the Boknafjord. Zero steppe ancestry. In Bronze Age burials from the same location, 3 centuries later, steppe ancestry averaged above 40%. Same place. 3 human generations. The people in those graves are not the same people. And here is the part nobody talks about. A hairline trace, somewhere between 3 and 6% of modern Norwegian men, still carries Y chromosome lineages that predate the Yamnaya arrival. They have never been told. They walk through Bergen and Oslo carrying the only monument the original men will ever have. They are the monument. That monument had a ratio. The reason the male line collapsed so completely, the reason the replacement was so total, comes down to a number. And the number is the problem. In 2017, Amy Goldberg was a researcher at Stanford University in the United States. Her team published a study in PLOS genetics that tried to answer a specific question. When the steppe population entered Bronze Age Europe, what was the sex ratio of the people crossing? Were there equal numbers of men and women? Were there more women than men, the way families typically migrate? What she found pointed to something else entirely. Her analysis of the X chromosome admixture patterns in ancient genomes suggested a strongly male-dominated migration, far more men than women. The estimates her team produced were high, strikingly high, and yet, the data said the exact opposite of what a peaceful migration would predict. Now, here's something you need to know. Another team at Harvard Medical School, Josef Lazaridis and David Reich, challenged Goldberg's precise numbers the same year. They identified a methodological issue with the X chromosome approach. They said the ratio she calculated was likely overstated, but, and this matters, even in the paper that challenged her, Lazaridis and Reich wrote this: there were definitely sex-biased patterns of mating and admixture in late Neolithic and Bronze Age Europe between the steppe populations and the locals. The two teams that disagreed on the number agreed completely on the event. More men arrived than women, significantly more. The disagreement is about how much more. Stay with me, because this next part is the reason this video exists. Population geneticists have a clinical term for the pattern left behind when one group of males comes to dominate the reproductive landscape of a region. They call it an elite male dominance event. It appears in genomic datasets from multiple continents. It has a specific forensic fingerprint, and the Bronze Age Scandinavian record matches that fingerprint. Science has a name for the pattern. History has a name for what produces that pattern. This video is not going to say that second name for you. You already know it. What makes this even harder to sit with is the geographic scale. New data from the 2024 Allentoft study shows that the first steppe admixed individuals appear simultaneously at sites separated by 700 kilometers, coastal Norway, central Sweden, Jutland, within the same geological century. 700 kilometers, 1 century. Simultaneously, no demographic event moves like that with an innocent explanation. They didn't only bring their DNA, they brought something that is still inside you right now, and you use it every single day without knowing where it came from. The corded ware complex, that's the name archaeologists give to the cultural package that traveled with the steppe expansion into Scandinavia, included the wheel, copper metallurgy, and horse-based transport. But it also included something more durable than any of those things. It included the ancestor of the language you're hearing right now, Proto-Indo-European, the linguistic root of Norwegian, Sanskrit, Persian, Latin, Greek, English, and 445 other living languages. It came from the steppe. David Anthony, an archaeologist at Hartwick College in the United States, spent decades tracing the connection between the Yamnaya expansion and the spread of Indo-European languages. When his work was cross-referenced with the ancient DNA data published in Nature in 2015, the picture locked. The cultural package and the genome arrived together. They were the same event. When Norwegians speak today, when they say the word for father or night or water, they are using a grammar that rode in from the Ukrainian steppe 4,500 years ago. The language of the fjords is not native to the fjords. What they found next changed everything we thought we knew. Not about genes, about gods. In 2019, a comparative mythologist named Julian de Huy published a study tracing the structural deep grammar of Norse mythology to steppe narrative templates. The story of Odin sacrificing himself on Yggdrasil, hanging on the world tree to gain wisdom, carries structural DNA nearly identical to the Vedic Purusha myth from ancient India. Both trace back to the same Proto-Indo-European storytelling tradition. The tree at the center of the Norse universe grew from the same soil as the universe the steppe people left behind. Actually, real quick, I want to ask you something. If you watched my last video on Viking DNA, the one about how many people buried as Vikings weren't Scandinavian by Ancestry, you already saw the first edge of this picture. What did that do to how you see Viking identity? Tell me in the comments, because what's coming next in this video is the part that video was building toward. Think about what this means. The Vikings didn't just build on older Norwegian culture. The older culture itself arrived from elsewhere. The mythology, the language, the gods, all of it came in on the same wave. The replacement wasn't only physical. The mythology of the replaced was replaced too. And then comes the twist that undoes the last comfortable assumption. The physical appearance most associated with Nordic identity, fair skin, light eyes, tall frame, that didn't arrive from the steppe either. The Yamnaya were darker than the people we call Nordic today. That look developed in Norway after the arrival as the admixed population adapted genetically to a high-latitude, low-sunlight environment over roughly 1,500 years. The face everyone calls Nordic belongs to the erased, not the conquerors. So what did the Yamnaya actually look like? Forensic anthropology teams, including a group at the University of Vienna, reconstructed Yamnaya physical profiles from ancient genomic pigmentation data. Medium to dark hair, olive to intermediate skin, predominantly brown eyes, not pale, not blonde, not what anyone calls Nordic. Ian Mathieson at the University of Pennsylvania in the United States tracked the alleles responsible for light skin and light eyes across hundreds of ancient European genomes. What he found, published in Nature in 2015, is this: those alleles are nearly absent in the steppe populations entering Scandinavia. They rise sharply in the admixed population, the children born from Yamnaya fathers and local hunter-gatherer mothers, as natural selection in Norway's low sunlight environment favored lighter pigmentation. It happened over centuries, not on the steppe. In Norway, there are three things this finding revealed. The third one, the one that takes apart a century of racial mythology, is the one that matters. The original Scandinavian hunter-gatherers, as confirmed by ancient DNA analysis, carried blue eyes with dark skin. The Yamnaya carried brown eyes with intermediate skin. The so-called Nordic type, fair, blue-eyed, is the genetic product of their union, shaped by Norwegian latitude. It belongs to no one's racial purity theory. It belongs to mixture. It belongs to both of them. And Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, the 18th century German anatomist who invented the term Caucasian as a racial category, whose work became the foundation of every racial hierarchy that followed, built his entire system on a skull from the Caucasus region, a population that is itself genetically Yamnaya adjacent. His taxonomy was wrong about the origin of the type he was trying to describe. Every racial theory that descended from his mistake was built on a mistake about which steppe people looked like what. And so the picture resolves. The Yamnaya arrived. The admixed descendants acquired the Nordic phenotype. Norway was born. We understand what happened. Except, one data point from the 2024 Allentoft study changes the frame entirely. The population entering Scandinavia through the Baltic corridor was not the original Yamnaya. It was already admixed. There was a replacement before this replacement. An earlier unnamed wave, which the Yamnaya-related population then itself replaced. We don't understand what happened. We understand the last chapter. The book is longer than anyone thought, and the corridor through which that earlier wave crossed, it remained geographically viable for approximately 200 years before climate and sea level shifts closed it. If it had closed 200 years earlier, before the first admixed humans crossed, the entire genomic architecture of Scandinavia would have been different. The billions of people descended from northern European populations exist because a land bridge stayed open for 2 centuries. 200 years, that's all. Now here's the part nobody tells you. This didn't happen once. Go to the northernmost point of Norway, Finnmark, the Arctic coast. Look at the Sami people. In every political and cultural conversation about Scandinavia, the Sami are described as the original inhabitants, the people who were there before the Bronze Age, before the Vikings, before anyone else. The ancient ones, the continuous thread. The genomic record tells a more complicated story. Päivi Ankamo is a geneticist at the University of Helsinki in Finland. Her team spent years studying ancient Fennoscandian genomes, the prehistoric populations of Finland, Lapland, and the Kola Peninsula. What she found in the North Sami Y chromosome data was unexpected. The paternal lineages, the male genetic line, trace with high specificity to men who migrated from northern Siberia roughly 2,000 to 4,000 years ago. Everything you've been told about the Sami as the unbroken original inhabitants of Scandinavia, hold on to it, because it's about to mean something completely different. The maternal lineages, the female line, trace to local Stone Age women. the same coastal hunter-gatherer female population that had occupied Finnmark since the Ice Age. The Sami are the genetic product of Siberian men and local Stone Age women. Their paternal line arrived from the other side of the world and replaced whatever male lineage had existed in Finnmark before. The same pattern, the same forensic fingerprint, male migration from a distant origin, local female line continuity, a new population born from the union. Now put both events on the same screen. Bronze Age Norway, around 2700 BCE, Yamnaya-related males crossing the Baltic. Local Y chromosomes compressed, female line preserved, new people born from the fracture. Then Finnmark, roughly 2,000 years ago, Siberian males crossing the Kola corridor, local Y chromosomes compressed, female line preserved, new people born from the fracture. Different continents of origin, different millennia, different populations on both sides. The exact same genomic architecture. There is, in the whole of Norway, no population whose paternal ancestry did not arrive through someone else's disappearance. And here is where the standard story about the Neolithic collapse gets turned completely around. For over a century, archaeologists assumed that the funnel beaker farming culture of Scandinavia, which preceded the Bronze Age replacement, was violently displaced by the incoming corded ware people. Conflict. Conquest, one group taking what belonged to another, but genomic evidence published in the journal Cell in 2019 points to a different mechanism. Researchers found strains of Yersinia pestis, the bacterial ancestor of the Black Death, embedded in ancient European DNA samples from precisely the period of the Neolithic population collapse. Before the Yamnaya-related arrivals were dominant, the farmers may already have been dying, and the steppe populations may have carried immunity to a pathogen the local people had never encountered. The replacers may not have killed the farmers. The farmers may have been dead before the replacers arrived to fill the space. The plague hypothesis changes the mechanism. It doesn't change the outcome. Whether the Neolithic men of Norway died of pathogen exposure or were displaced through direct competition or some combination of both, the result in the genomic record is identical. The male line of the people who had occupied those fjords for 5,000 years was replaced. The women outlasted the men. A new population was born from that asymmetry. And here is where the science stops giving you comfortable language. Population geneticists use the term elite male dominance event to describe a specific genomic pattern. It appears when one group of males comes to so thoroughly dominate the reproductive landscape of a region that the local male genetic lineages compress towards zero within a few generations. The pattern has a specific signature in the ratio between autosomal ancestry, X chromosome ancestry, and Y chromosome ancestry across the ancient record. The Bronze Age Scandinavian data matches this pattern. Science has a name for the pattern. The pattern has a name in history too, a name for what consistently produces it when you find it in the human record. The name in history is not a comfortable one. This script is not going to say it, because the moment it's said, half the viewers will argue about the word and stop hearing the evidence. So instead, think about what you know. Think about what produces a 10-to-1 male arrival ratio documented across an entire continent within a single century. Think about what produces the systematic compression of local male Y chromosomes while female lineages survive. Think about what human history looks like repeatedly when those two things occur together. You already know the word. You've known it since segment 3. This video just wasn't willing to say it before you were ready to hear it. Now consider what this means for the people inside the Norwegian genome who have no name. They were not a small group. They were not peripheral. For over 5,000 years, before a single Yamnaya horseman crossed the Baltic, they were the people of Norway. They built the first structures along the fjords. They carved the rock art that still exists on Norwegian stone today. They had language. They had mythology. They had names for the mountains and the sea. They had children. Those children had children. And then, within a geological instant, within what amounts to a few human lifetimes, the male line ended. The women survived. Mitochondrial DNA passed through those women is still inside modern Norwegians today. If you are Norwegian or of Norwegian descent, you carry a biological inheritance from those women, from the women who outlasted the men who were replaced. But the men themselves, their names, their words, their stories, are gone in a way that no amount of sequencing can recover. Except they are not entirely gone. Remember that trace, that 3 to 6% of modern Norwegian men who carry Y chromosome lineages that predate the Yamnaya arrival. That number is not a rounding error. That is survival. Those are the men who, for whatever reason, geography, luck, a valley that stayed isolated, a family that moved north fast enough, managed to pass their paternal line forward across 45 centuries of demographic replacement. They are walking around right now. In Norway, in the Norwegian diaspora around the world, they have no idea. And there's something else. The mitochondrial record, the female line, shows a continuity that the male line does not, meaning the women of pre-Bronze Age Norway survived the transition in far greater numbers. Their genetic signal is woven through the modern Norwegian genome in a way the male signal is not. The descendants of the original Norwegian women are not a trace percentage. They are present in every single person with Norwegian ancestry on the maternal line, going back further than the Viking Age, further than the Bronze Age, all the way back to the hunter-gatherers who first walked onto ice-free Norwegian land after the glaciers retreated. You carry them. If you have any Northern European ancestry at all, you very likely carry them. There is a specific genetic marker, identified in Western hunter-gatherer genome studies, that appears in low but consistent frequencies in modern Scandinavian populations. It's a signal of pre-Bronze Age ancestry persisting through the maternal line. Researchers working with the Allen Ancient DNA Resource Database have been cross-referencing this signal with modern population datasets. The results are still being published. But the direction is clear. The people we cannot name left something in the people who came after them, something biological, something that 4,500 years of demographic change did not fully erase. The question that sits underneath all of this data, the one that no study has yet answered, is not genetic, it's human. Did the people being replaced know what was happening? Did they see the demographic wave arriving across the Baltic, generation by generation? Did they have a word for what they were experiencing? We don't know. We will never know. Their language is gone. It went with the men, but their daughters stayed. And their daughters' daughters stayed. And the chain from those women to the people alive right now has never been broken. Here is what science has given us, and what it hasn't. It has given us the ratio, the timing, the geographic scale, the forensic fingerprint of what happened in Bronze Age Norway. It has given us the biological confirmation that a group of people existed, that they were numerous, that they occupied those fjords for longer than recorded history covers in most parts of the world, and that their male line, on the paternal genetic record, was ended within a few human generations. What science has not given us is their name, not the name of the people, not the name of a single person among them, not a word from their language. Not the name they gave to the sea, or the mountains, or the children they had who survived them through their daughters. This is not a gap in the research. This is not something a future study will fill. Language does not preserve in bone. Myth does not survive in genome. The things that made them human, the things that made them a people rather than a DNA signature, those things required mouths to pass them on. And the mouth stopped. If you are watching this and you have Norwegian ancestry, or Finnish, Swedish, British, German, Russian, or any Northern European heritage, then you carry biological material from both sides of this story, from the women who survived, possibly, if you are male, from the men who didn't disappear entirely. Both threads are in you, the replaced and the replacers, fused into the person reading these words. That is not a metaphor. That is a genomic fact. If you want to go deeper into your own ancestry, if you want to understand which ancient populations are actually alive inside your genome right now, the link for the DNA test we've partnered with is below. Use the code in the description. The results will tell you things your family history never could. And now, the thing I've been building towards since the first frame. The men who were here first, whose Y chromosome line was ended in the Bronze Age, whose language went silent sometime around 2500 BCE in Norway, they are the most populous unnamed people in European history. Their biological descendants number in the tens of millions. Their cultural descendants, in the sense that their female line genetic material is inside the people who built Western civilization, number in the hundreds of millions. They had no Viking saga, no Eddic poem, no stone inscription in any language anyone has decoded. The people who replaced them built the mythology. The mythology became the identity became the nation. And the men underneath, the men who called those fjords home before a single steppe horseman crossed the Baltic, have had, until now, no one to say their names. because we don't know them. This video is the closest thing to a name they will ever have.